You're listening to Opera Box Score.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Wherever you are, however you're listening, it's America's talk radio show about opera. It's Opera Box Score. I'm George Cedarquist, joined this week by Oliver Camacho. Okay, we go inside the huddle to catch up with director librettist Amy Stebbins and composer Hauke Berheide, who haven't been on the OBS since the before times, by the way, to find out how they used the pandemic as inspiration for new opera forms auf Deutsch Land. Plus, in the 2-minute drill, the Grammy noms are in, and continuing with the decline of opera recordings, our category is the Video Awards. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast on Stitcher and Spotify. You click follow. On Apple Podcasts, just hit the plus sign. And of course, send us a voice memo or email us your opera hot takes, operaboxscore@gmail.com. You're going to get an OBS beer coaster and an OBS lapel pin just for sharing your own hot take. Oliver, how was your Thanksgiving feast?
Well, we're recording on the Monday after Thanksgiving, and nobody is back to work yet, including Weston Williams, Ashley Hartgrave, and Matt Cummings. Actually, they all have separate conflicts, and Weston, actually, we lost due to bad internet. I guess his internet provider is still on break. But I have not had a day off this entire weekend. I worked all day yesterday. I worked all day today.
Yeah.
I worked half the day on Saturday. And I actually had to go on Thursday as well. So it's not been super relaxing, as you can tell by my voice. I'm very wound up today.
You are not going to want to hear what I did over Thanksgiving then. So get this. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, Detroit Red Wings are on TV. Thanksgiving Day, the football game with the Detroit Lions. Friday, England, USA, FIFA World Cup match with almost 20 million Americans watching it. Saturday, Michigan, Ohio State. Michigan wins. And Sunday, the Bears are on TV. I have watched more sports in the last 5 days and drunk more beer. My kids told me I needed to take a break.
One sports thing, the Davis Cup happened over the weekend and Canada won, and it's the first time led by Felix Auger-Aliassime and Denis Shapovalov. And I missed all of those matches because guess what? I was working. But my heart was with those Canadian boys.
Let's get a postcard from Germany. Let's talk some opera.
Huddle up. Let's go inside the huddle.
Director librettist Amy Stebbins and composer Hauke Berheide are a creative team based in Germany and a favorite pair of mine on the OBS, but they haven't been in our show since before the pandemic. They're currently working on an immersive mixed reality opera for the Staatstheater Augsburg based on the novel Piranesi by Susanna Clark. They join us from New Hampshire, where they're taking part in the MacDowell residency. Welcome back to the show, Amy and Hauke.
Thank you for inviting us, and thanks for having us in your wonderful show, and it's great to be back.
It is. So how is the Thornton Wilder suite out there at MacDowell?
MacDowell is, first of all, has been here for over a century and had sort of a series of regulars. Thornton Wilder was one of them. And in the studio that I'm in, which is called Phi Beta, I noticed there are these plaques with the names of the people who had previously been there before. And like there's Susie Lauren Parks and who else? Well, and it's like Aaron Copland, Meredith Monk, James Lapine.
And then,
but in mine, there was this one name that was on all of the plaques for like 40 years. And her name was Louisa Talma. And it turns out that she was a composer. She studied in France with Nadia Boulanger. And she was the first American woman to have an opera premiered in Europe.
Yes.
And the libretto was written by Thornton Wilder.
So you are sucking up all the energy and inspiration from the MacDowell residency. Let's go back a little bit, Amy and Hauke. The life in Germany during the pandemic, creating art, specifically in your craft, what was that experience like for you?
dark. As it was for probably the majority of people working freelance in the United States and all over Europe and in many other places of the world. And the funny thing is, I was actually working on a particular piece which had a text which was called Darkness, on the text by Lord Byron, in which started with the line, "Morn came and brought no day." And in a way, that was at least my personal private experience of how it felt.
I would agree that it was very dark, but I think coming from the US, I have a slightly different perspective because I also saw what happened to a lot of my friends and colleagues here in the country. On the one hand, many people like myself ended up staying at home quite a lot because the theaters were closed, or productions were happening that met certain kinds of criteria that they could be performed, and my work just did not fall into that category. On the other hand, we were frequently receiving subsidies from not from the federal state, but from the individual. So this language gets confusing, from the Länder in Germany, which is like what we would call states, so like New Hampshire money. We were getting NIV, so it's not German money, but it's public money, and we did not hunger during the pandemic, and I think that's also important to just mention, is that we were depressed and alone and isolated, but we were not. We did not have the economic rug pulled out from underneath us.
And how did the pandemic change your artistic portfolio?
Well, a couple of things. It gave us an opportunity to think about the media we work in live audience contexts, and also the potential for working in more mediated contexts. We had a residency during the pandemic at the Academy for Theater and Digitality in Dortmund, where we worked with VR and also started working more with cinematic technologies rather than live theater was basically, or live opera was what we had done up until that point. And it also led us to think, up until now, we've worked almost exclusively within the public theater system in Germany. That's our bread and butter, and the orchestras. And the pandemic encouraged us to think a little bit about expanding our range of employers into other groups.
If I may add some more thing, the strange impression we got is that it was not really the pandemic or the lockdowns themselves which had the most impact on our work directly. Especially for me as a composer, but the aftermath, the things which are happening now, where the budgets are cut down. So that is actually our crisis more or less happening now.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of fallout now. During the pandemic, there was a lot of public money being pumped into actually our system to keep us afloat. And now that things are, there's also the energy crisis and the war going on, so nothing has returned to normal, of course. But the chickens are coming home to roost for what happened, that funding during the pandemic. And we see very much a long recession. Obviously, there's a recession in Germany, but one specifically that will hit the cultural sector very hard.
All right, so Windy City was a film commissioned in 2017, I think it was, but it only just came out in October. So what was the journey for that?
The original idea was that the ensemble just wanted an instrumental piece, and we convinced them that it would be even more exciting to have a silent movie with live music, with something which is hardly ever done. It's kind of a new format, honestly. And for that, we had to get funding, basically. That was really the major problem.
The commissioning body for this was the Düsseldorf Symphony Hall, and they have a resident new music ensemble called No Taboo, with whom Hauke has a long relationship, and they asked him to write a 20-minute chamber music piece, and specifically about the topic of the sounds of the city. And at the time we were living in Chicago,
right.
And I was doing a PhD in cinema and media studies, and we were kind of talking a lot about generally the relationship between moving image and music and sound, and about how horrible it's become because Hans Zimmer has ruined everything. So we wanted to do a project, and we approached them, and they said, sure, but find your own money.
Right.
Which in 2017, for an opera director, for film just wasn't possible. And through the pandemic, a number of funding sources opened up. Also, to be honest, since 2017, it's a little bit also of the sort of impact of Me Too on the funding situation and public money in Germany, is that there's a lot more attention given to gender equity. I don't know if that specifically played a role in this case, but I imagine it may have. So the money was available and we were able to make the project.
You had this idea to make this movie as a silent film with live music that in pre-pandemic times would never have been greenlit. And then Me Too and the pandemic come along and actually make the thing happen.
Ta-da!
Let's take a listen. Your project at Opera Frankfurt, I feel like I've been talking about forever. So remind me about the project, remind me where it started, and remind me when is it actually going to happen?
Yeah, this project is really almost in puberty at this point. It's been growing for so long. The commission originally came in either 17 or 18 from Bernd Loebe, who, based on a previous work that we had done in Munich, which was about mediality, information, and war and truth and fake news, wanted us to make a new work about the effects of the digital turn, which is, a super concrete and easy to imagine phenomenon that you can surely just whoop up a chamber opera about. So what we did is we sort of took that prompt and began a research looking specifically at sort of what is being referred to as the fifth industrial revolution. So like singularity, AI meets humans, all of us hanging out in the cloud, and connecting it with questions that were raised in the first industrial revolution. A lot of our work is interested in kind of long historical frameworks for contemporary problems. So we started doing that research and ultimately came up with a story that sort of focuses on three different groups. One is a group of insiders. Those are sort of the people, let's imagine like Googlers or, Silicon Valley types, people who are occupying beautiful spaces, immaterial spaces where labor seems to have disappeared. And on the other hand, you have outsiders where labor is continuing to take place, but this is more sort of a reactionary laboring mass based on the Luddites. So machine people who would destroy the weaving machines, the first automated looms. So we're talking actually much more about sort of like a violent mob rather than like a communist move, although there's ambivalences there. And these two groups are brought together by the main protagonist, who is a poor teenager who's pregnant, who tries to kill herself and ends up becoming a massive internet star.
Because this suicide happens online.
Right.
Yeah.
Hauke, am I right that you are building some instruments
Yes.
for this piece?
Yes, I'm doing that, and that is actually a very logical consequence out of the desire to produce sounds. And usually I have an idea for a sound, and then I try to find out how to do that. And most of the time it's fine to use the instruments I find in the orchestra, but sometimes what I need is not there. And especially that piece, as it is very much about the hidden labor behind all of that, we decided that we want to have sounds which refer to what would be digital sounds. I don't know, like the beeping cell phone or whatever. but I wanted to have the sounds made by hand, kind of. So the thing is, building instruments which produce sounds which sound as if they were actually digital. And so for this, we're doing things, we're using instruments which are hardly known, like verrophone, which is something similar to a glass harp, but better and louder, or tubophones, which are just pipes which you beat on top, or certain bottle instruments, or something which uses strings attached to a violoncello, and
this is an instrument that you built. I mean, the other ones are.
And the other instruments kind of exist in some form, but I also invented or developed new things which haven't been done, like attaching springs to string instruments and using them in the orchestra and this kind of things. Yeah.
And I think just one important point for this is that we're doing this in the Bockenheimer Depot, which is sort of famously known for where John Cage's only opera premiered. It's the sort of experimental stage in Frankfurt. And we have Ensemble Moderne is going to be performing the part of the orchestra. And they are, there's no pit in this space, and we actually have the stages raked, but it goes down, and then there's kind of a catwalk in the front, and Ensemble Moderne is on by either side, and their performance of these instruments will be very, very fronted, so the audience will very clearly be able to see the production of these so-called digital sounds through analog means.
Definitely, yeah. If you're going to build them, like we want to see them, right? That's fantastic. I led talking about your project in Augsburg in 2024, the Pyrenees project, I guess we can call it. I don't know this work at all that it's based on. So what was the genesis of this? Where are you? I know there's a virtual reality element. What do I need to know?
This is a piece which is going to happen, but we still don't know what it's going to look like, and we're still kind of figuring out how it actually works. But it is a relatively small setup. It's going to happen in a form industrial space. It's a cooling building, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, form of a defunct gas plant.
Yes, the Kühlergebäude.
Yeah, it's in the Kühlergebäude.
Exactly.
I just wanted to say Kühlergebäude.
Kühlergebäude, right? And it's 100 years old, but it still has its industrial. I mean, you can smell it, and there are the coolers in the air. And there's a balcony all around. So that is the place. We are going to have some 12 instruments, something like that, and a handful of singers. And the room will be both a stage and a sound installation. And people will be sitting on turning chairs and will experience the piece both live and just analog in the room, but also through VR goggles. I mean, so we are going to switch between those spaces, let me call them spaces or stages.
They're kind of a virtual stage and then an analog stage.
Yeah, and the pieces, we don't know what it's about, but we know already a lot of elements which are going to be in it. And that's a labyrinth, and someone in the labyrinth, or a palace, or something, or a cave, and he's imprisoned there.
This is why you should never let the composer explain the dramaturgy.
This is a terrible idea. So the set... The scenic design is an instrument?
Okay, so I think first it's important to understand a little bit about the book. Pyrenees is the second book by Susanna Clark, and it's basically about a man who is exploring a vast, infinite house of chambers, which functions like a labyrinth, but it's this beautiful space with these, antique sculptures, and the first floor is the ocean, and the second floor is the sky, and it's very ideal. And over the course of the book, this character comes to realize, by discovering former journals that he wrote, that it's actually a prison, and that actually he is being kept out of reality, and that there are people in reality who miss him, and it's kind of a metaphor for trauma in a way. And so what we're interested in doing is finding ways of transforming the experience of the space, and of course virtual reality for that will be helpful. Now to the set being an installation, we have a very small ensemble for this piece. We have 4 singers and 10 instrumentalists. And the idea is that the physical space will also be the sonic space. So there will be objects that make sound, but also have a function within kind of the narrative. And that's about as far as we are with that. I should also mention our designer, Belen Montoliu, with whom we have worked on several occasions, and is a genius. And she will surely solve all of our problems.
This is why I love having you on the show. Is it's like you blow my mind, you two, every time. It's just like I never would have thought of that in a million years. Before I let you go, get back to the Thornton Wilder suite at McDowell. We got to talk a little bit of sports before I let you go. So here we go.
Thank
Germany in the World Cup. They're at the bottom of Group E. They faced a must-win game against Costa Rica on Thursday, and they've scored 2 goals in the last 2 matches. Realistically, is there anything other than tears in the future for Die Mannschaft?
I mean,
Amy's crying in her beer.
Amy's already crying. I'm biased because, I mean, I feel kind of sorry for those guys who are now somewhere in the desert and trying to interest the rest of the world in their game. But somehow they're kind of crying alone a bit. We have to admit that one of the wonderful things about McDowell is that you're really isolated, which means we have, especially as we have only brought our German phones, we only have good data if we go to the Zoom room where we are now.
We are in the Zoom room.
So,
by the way, which has a bed in it.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah. So there is hardly a way to really get the vibe of a World Cup going on. It feels like I feel flying squirrels and a bobcat going
and deer. We're like a Disney forest basically here. So there are no, there's no football.
Director, librettist Amy Stebbins and composer Hauke Berheide are a creative team based in Germany. Favorite pair of mine to have on the show. It is so great to have Stebbins and Berheide back on the OBS. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes with us on the show.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank
you. Speaking Soundly is your backstage pass to today's biggest stars on the biggest stages from the world of opera, orchestra, and more. Join host and Metropolitan Opera principal trumpet David Krause as he sits down with Grammy Award winners Joyce DiDonato, Anthony Roth-Costanzo, Isabel Leonard, Terence Blanchard, Wynton Marsalis, Emmanuel Axe, and other superstars as they speak about their lives and creative process.
It's quite a roster. Hear how Isabel Leonard gets into character, how Joyce DiDonato developed her voice, and how an accidental trip to Carnegie Hall ignited Emmanuel Axe's fantasy to perform on that very stage. Speaking Soundly gives audiences new perspectives and never-before-heard stories from renowned musicians, conductors, composers, and singers.
Catch the latest episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And follow the show on Instagram at SpeakingSNDLY, at SpeakingSindly. And for more info about the podcast, check out artfulnarrativesmedia.com.
All right. Little fantasy football update. Football stops for nobody. Tobias Wright. He said, now before Thanksgiving, Tobias wrote, we dominated this weekend, including the second highest fantasy points ever by a kicker. Victory on Monday as we improved to 8-3 and regained sole possession of first place. And then today he just wrote, are you tired of winning yet? I'm not. We did it again. We're on a serious heater this year. I'd like to commend you, George, on an excellent draft. We're now 9-3. I swear to you, Oliver, if we win this fantasy football league, Opera Philadelphia is going to send us the prize belt.
Yeah, excited. I have a picture with that belt on my Instagram, if you follow me.
Send us a voice memo, email us your hot takes, operaboxscore@gmail.com. Get the OBS beer coaster and the OBS lapel pin just for sharing your own hot take.
This just in, the 2-minute drill.
All right, listen up. Here's everything you need to know about what happened in Operaland this week.
The Grammy nominations are out, and operaboxscore is ready to break them down after the drill.
Blaming the funding cuts from Arts Council England, Welsh National Opera will cease performances in Liverpool. General Director Aidan Lang said, quote, "We are committed to continue delivering our work, but will need to diligently review the impact of rising costs and funding cuts as we move forward."
Teatro alla Scala is defending its decision to stage the opera Boris Godunov for its December 7th season opener. Quote, "The Ukrainian council wanted us to cancel," said La Scala general manager Dominique Meyer. "I understand this attitude, but I cannot agree with it. There is nothing in this production that goes against Ukraine."
Several artists have announced their intention to bring legal action against the Salzburg Festival for lack of payment. The festival released a statement denying the allegations that workers were unpaid.
The Glyndebourne Festival has announced it will rethink the way certain quote-unquote offensive operas will be performed. Some operas in our archive reflect the society and norms of previous ages, containing historical opinions and social assumptions which may offend audiences today. Where once exoticism and Orientalism in the presentation of non-European cultures were acceptable, we recognize through our modern lens that this was wrong then and is wrong now.
The Orpheus Classical label is back. Only a few hundred recordings on the label have been made available over the last several years, but after a 2021 review of the catalog revealed the owners actually had the rights to over 2,000 recordings, they've decided to begin releasing those under the revitalized label.
Boston Baroque has announced that it is proud to add to its resource library 5 performing and critical editions, as well as cadenzas and ornamentation for various works, all created by founding music director Martin Perlman, who said these additions to the resource library represent a significant contribution to the early music field. Thank you very much.
In trade news, American Opera Project announced that General Director Matt Gray will step down. Gray's been with AOP for nearly 20 years and said, quote, "It's finally come time to step away and pursue some of the personal goals that I've delayed in my years of dedication to AOP's mission and artists." Former General Director Charles Jardin will serve as interim.
Detroit Opera has announced that Roberto Calbi will become the company's music director starting immediately. Calbi made his Detroit Opera conducting debut in the 2017-18 season and is only the second music director in the company's history.
On the disabled list, Peter Bachawa has canceled a number of concerts over the last couple weeks due to COVID. We wish him a speedy recovery.
Exit stage right. A great. American composer Ned Rorem has died at the age of 99. In the opera world, he's best known for his adaptations of Strindberg's Miss Julie and Thornton Wilder's Our Town, which premiered in 2006.
Italian tenor Daniele Battaglioni has died at the age of 92. He sang over 30 roles in his career between 1949 and 1980, including his Met debut in 1956, and where he went on to sing for 7 seasons and 54 performances.
And on this day, November 28th, very little happened in the classical music world. Jean-Baptiste Lully was born in 1632, Anton Rubinstein born in 1829, and in 2015 it was the first performance of Schneekönigin, an opera by Georg Alexander Albrecht.
And that's your 2-minute drill.
That is the entirety of Pippa's Song by Ned Rorem, sung by soprano Laura Aiken with pianist Donald Sulson. We knew that Ned Rorem would eventually die, but it still comes as a shock for us singers. He's one of the first American composers that we're exposed to when we are studying song. I don't know that much about his operas, but I did read some of his personal diaries, and boy, were they dishy when I was a young musician
Got you excited.
trying to find some identity, somebody to relate to via identity. And even in his 30s, he was still fooling around like we do when we're in our 20s.
There he was.
Very exciting.
99. I remember when his opera version of Thornton Wilder's Our Town came out in 2006. It was premiered at Indiana University. And I don't know if you could say it's entered the canon yet. My guess is that it probably will be. You could debate that point. It's wonderfully split over many different roles. The music is great. Obviously, the story's compelling. Hilariously, Amy and Hauke and I were just talking about Thornton Wilder's Our Town earlier on in this very show.
So the Grammy noms, let's just go over them really quickly. Starting with the Best Opera Recording, we have Matthew O'Coin, friend of the show, Eurydice, from the Metropolitan Opera production. There is not a audio-only recording. This is video. Terence Blanchard's Fire, Shut Up and My Bone, also from the Metropolitan Opera, music, conducted by Yannick Nézet-Séguin and with a mostly black cast. I think it's an all-black cast, actually. So two performances that are from the HD broadcast. Very hard if you're a standard opera consumer who buys CDs. And I know they're still out there to get your hands on that. And then the third opera is Anthony Davis's Life and Times of Malcolm X from Boston Modern Opera Project. So in the Best Vocal Solo category, we have Joyce DiDonato's environmentally themed project called Eden, with Il Pomodoro, conducted by Maxim Emelyanichev, I Stan. Sasha Cook, mezzo-soprano, commissioned a bunch of composers to write songs for her album How Do I Find You, with pianist Kirill Kuzmin. We have Sean O'Pebolo's art song spirituals in the collection Lord, How Come You Here, with friend of the show Will Liverman and Janae Bridges, with pianist Paul Sanchez. We have friend of the show. Oh, is he friend of the show? I think he's a friend of Oliver Camacho. Nicholas Pond's album with The Knights and Brooklyn Rider and guest countertenor Reginald Mobley. Songs by Nico Muli. And Renee Fleming and Yannick Nézet-Séguin, another nature-themed project called The Voice of Nature, The Anthropocene. So Joyce DiDonato has so many Grammys already. I'm hoping that Sean O'Pebble will pull out this one because Will Liverman was robbed last year. Let's face it. And what did Weston say about he has a comment about the opera category. Once again, 2/3 of the noms are for video releases, not audio. Weston would like to advocate for a separate category for audio only. If pop music can have a separate category for music videos, why can't classical music have a separate category for film performances? It would allow more recordings to be considered, add a bit of incentive to produce traditional audio-only recordings, dare I hope for studio recordings even, and keep the Met from hogging all the attention.
Well, I think maybe we will see some sort of a change like that. It could take years, of course, but if classical music has opened up into digital filmed media because of the pandemic, again, something that Amy and Hauke and I talked about just minutes ago on the show, could you have a camera opera category? Or would that have to belong to the Music Video Awards, which happen at some other point in the year?
Shout out to friends of the show, Eileen Perez, Michelle de Jong, and Matthew Polenzani, who were part of the Met Remembers 9/11 Verdi Requiem, which is nominated for Best Choral Performance. And you'll remember that we talked about that performance right after it was aired on PBS, and we were all very moved by it. So I would not be mad if the Met took that category. So we have other things to talk about briefly.
Well, I was going to ask you first about the Boston Baroque and its resource library. So you know that I know nothing about Baroque music. I'm the guy who can't name 5 operas by Handel. I don't think I still can. But like, how big of
figure out the 5th one?
How big of a deal is this to have this resource library all of a sudden kind of open up, led by Martin Perlman?
Yeah, I mean, Boston Baroque has been a leader in North America for historically informed performance. I haven't seen which performing editions they are contributing to the library, but I think it's always good to continue to create editions that everybody can use and not just the nerds who like take the manuscripts and put them into their finale and make performing editions for their friends. There are other organizations that are doing this work, and I think we're woefully behind. The Centre de Musique Baroque Versailles seems to be putting out a new edition like every month of something. So yeah, it's good that we have an American organization. I think Yale also publishes performing editions. But yeah, not enough yet. So more of this, please. As far as the cadenzas and ornamentations for various works go, that's great. I think it's important to get a snapshot of what we think about cadenzas and ornaments in 2022. I still think it's best to learn personally, for individual artists to learn the history of ornamentation and to figure out how to do it for themselves. There's no point in giving it away for free. Us early music people need something to hang on to so that we get hired for our skill. So other things we'd like to talk about. We talked about Ned Rorem. We should probably do a, Hall of Fame on Ned Rorem because, I mean, he was Ned Rorem, but, not so much opera out there for us to talk about. I could definitely talk about his songs and his other works.
Yeah.
The Arts Council of England continues to deliver collateral damage.
I mean, we were cutting stories.
Sorry,
so we didn't
Liverpool.
have to talk about this as much. It's just we are still seeing the rippling effects of this. I'm playing catch up, trying to read all the articles, all the opinion letters that are coming in. Various folks outside of England now are starting to sort of get their 2 cents heard.
We'll have to follow up on the Salzburg story to see what really is going on there, and Salzburg not being able to pay their bills. You would think they'd be able to sell something. Don't they have like all the wealth over there in Salzburg, like all the music wealth? They can sell Mozart's house and put it up for auction,
For a town that Mozart thought was like a 2-bit nothing burg, it's got a lot of clout now, doesn't it? Maybe you were wrong, Wolfgang. Finally, Glyndebourne is making a very clear statement about what it calls these, quote, offensive operas. I don't know why it put it in quotation marks, because they are. And I think they deserve credit, perhaps. Not a pat on the back, but they say, quote, we recognize through our modern lens that this was wrong then and is wrong now. It's going to be interesting to see how that really trickles down into its programming.
This is clearly the work of, or the result of the work that has been done post 2020. Right. And in a way, contrast to companies like Arena de Verona, who are doubling down on their practices.
Exactly.
So good on you, Glyndebourne, even though you were defunded by the...
Yeah, right, exactly. Exactly. Well, we lost all our money, so we can't do Turandot or the Mikado anymore. But presumably these are the sorts of titles they're talking about, right? Abduction from the Seraglio as well, I think you could put in there. I don't
think they're saying they're going to stop doing it. I think they're going to try to find a way to contextualize it for contemporary audiences. I don't think they're dumping these operas.
Well, they talk about their archive, so maybe this means that what they need to do is do new productions of these pieces.
Yeah, exactly.
And we'll see how that trickles down.
Do less racist productions. And finally, the Orpheus label. I have some old Orpheus recordings, and I'd be curious to see what's going to come out again, because yes, they recorded a lot of great singing that you cannot find anywhere right now. So it'd be nice to have some of those back in circulation, even though, let's be real, who's going to buy them? We're just going to download them. So
let's wrap this show up.
Good call, bad call on Opera Box Score.
Good call, bad call. Coming at you. Weston's bad call, obvious. His internet. Oliver, you want to go first? I can go first.
Bad call, Mother Nature, for a landslide in Ischia, which forced the cancellation of the Prima of Don Carlo, which was starring friends of the show Eileen Perez and Matthew Polenzani. Earlier in the day, Matthew Polenzani posted to Instagram, "Can't wait for tonight's premiere." That Instagram post became outdated very quickly.
I have a good call, bad call. Join the offensive linemen of the Philadelphia Eagles have gotten together to make a Christmas record which benefits the Children's Crisis Treatment Center in Philadelphia. Obviously, that's a good thing. A bad thing is that it's being done by the Philadelphia Eagles. There's nothing I can possibly like about any Philadelphia sports franchise at all. That is it for this week's edition of America's Talk radio show about opera. Our announcer is Norm Waddell. He's at normwaddell.com. Again, make sure you subscribe to the podcast on Stitcher and Spotify. You click follow. On Apple Podcasts, hit the plus sign. Send us that voice memo or just email us your hot take, operaboxscore@gmail.com. Get the OBS beer coaster and the OBS lapel pin just for sharing your thoughts. Our creative consultant is Oliver Camacho. Our audio editor is Weston Williams. For our guests, Amy Stebbins and Hauke Berheide, I'm George Cedarquist, asking you to continue the conversation about opera as you cool your Gebäude. We're back with an all-new show next week when we give you a view from the pit in our new segment featuring players and opera orchestras, starting with Metropolitan Opera principal trumpet David Krauss. Plus, you get more opera headlines, more hot takes, and more cadenzas in your library. Join us.